What would you do if the whole world was against you? Imagine standing in a courtroom alone. No lawyer, no allies, just powerful figures determined to take away the only thing your family has left. You don't have a law degree, but you have the truth. Will that be enough to turn the tide? Benjamin is not a lawyer, but today he has to fight like one. Because if he loses, his grandmother's home will be gone forever. A tense showdown between the weak and the powerful, between justice and greed. But there's one thing they didn't expect. Benjamin isn't an easy man to defeat. This isn't just a courtroom battle. It's about those who dare to stand up, even when no one believes they can win. Have you ever been underestimated? Share your story in the comments. Benjamin stepped into the courtroom, his old suit slightly wrinkled, his tie a little off-center. But he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was protecting his grandmother's home. No one in the room saw him as a threat. They had judged him the moment he walked in. Across the room, Olivia Williams, the corporate lawyer, whispered to her assistant. She didn't even need to look at Benjamin to know this wasn't a fair fight. A man with no law degree, no experience, no power. She had crushed dozens like him before, and today she would do it again. Judge Samuel Adams glanced down at the case file, then looked up. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he turned to Benjamin. Mr. Calloway, you don't have legal representation? Benjamin tightened his grip. He knew this question was coming, but hearing it out loud still made his chest tighten. No, Your Honor, I will be representing myself. A few quiet chuckles rippled from the other side of the room. Olivia slowly adjusted her cufflinks, a smirk playing on her lips, unconcealed condescension. They had underestimated Benjamin, and that was their first mistake. Because today he wasn't just here to argue, he was here to win. No one believed Benjamin had a chance. Judge Samuel Adams flipped through the case file, sighing so softly it was almost imperceptible, like he had already read the outcome of this trial before it even began. To him, this seemed like a straightforward case. An ordinary citizen trying to fight a corporate giant, a battle of unequals. Across the room, Olivia Williams smiled leisurely. She had nothing to worry about. Before her lay a stack of documents, filled with dense legal clauses, the kind of weapons she had used to crush countless people before. She enunciated each word carefully as she addressed the court. Your Honor, this case is not complicated. The legal documents are clear. My client's corporation followed all regulatory procedures. Mr. Calloway simply failed to meet his financial obligations on time. Everything was done by the book. She spoke as if the case was already won. But Benjamin didn't flinch. He stood, scanning the room, feeling the weight of doubt pressing against him. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady. Yes, the law is clear, but the real question is, did they actually follow it? A flicker of irritation flashed across Olivia's face. She hadn't expected Benjamin to remain this composed. Judge Samuel Adams leaned back in his chair for the first time that day, looking at Benjamin with something close to curiosity. All right, let's hear what you have to say. The game had just begun. Sharp argument or just a bluff? Olivia Williams rose gracefully, confidence radiating from every movement. She buttoned her jacket, stepping toward the jury with the poise of someone who was used to winning. She didn't need to look at her notes. She had already won this case in her head. Your Honor, she began, her voice smooth, polished, like a perfectly rehearsed speech. We are not here today to discuss emotions. We are here to discuss the law. She stole a quick glance at Benjamin, a hint of a smirk on her lips. I completely sympathize with the defendant's situation. Losing a home is painful, but pain does not override legal responsibility. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. My client followed every necessary legal procedure. The mortgage agreement was signed. The payment deadline passed. The foreclosure was conducted by the book. She turned to Judge Samuel Adams, her gaze unwavering. My client did nothing wrong. No deception, no misconduct. Her hands clasped together, her tone softening, but losing none of its sharpness. The truth is simple. Mr. Calloway failed to meet his financial obligations. And when that happens, the law must be enforced. She nodded slightly as if the verdict was already decided. The jury seemed to agree. Judge Adams remained unmoved. But Benjamin was different. He didn't waver. His grip tightened on the chair because he knew the truth. Olivia thought she had sealed this door shut, but Benjamin was about to open one she never saw coming. The counterattack no one saw coming. The courtroom grew tense. Olivia Williams walked confidently back to her seat, convinced she had secured the win. But when Benjamin stood, he was no longer the underestimated man they thought he was. He stepped into the center of the room, scanning the jury, then locking eyes with Judge Samuel Adams. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low but commanding, "there is one thing the prosecution has failed to mention." A flicker of unease crossed Olivia's face. She didn't like surprises. "I have spent the last 6 months studying every detail of this case," Benjamin continued, "and I have found something that no one wants to talk about." Slowly, he pulled out a folder from his briefcase. The room fell completely silent. "My grandmother's mortgage agreement exists in 2 copies, each bearing a completely different signature." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Olivia stiffened. "And that's not all," Benjamin said. His gaze locked onto her. "I have proof that the second document, the one used to seize my grandmother's home, was signed after she had already been hospitalized for a stroke." Judge Adams' brow furrowed as he took the documents from Benjamin's hands. All traces of dismissiveness vanished. Olivia was no longer smiling. Benjamin took a slow step back toward his seat, his eyes sharp. "So the real question is, if your client followed the law, why did they need a forged signature?" Silence. No one had an answer. But Benjamin knew. This was just the beginning. The energy in the room shifted. The jury whispered among themselves. Olivia Williams blinked rapidly, her hands tightening around the documents in front of her. This was no longer a simple foreclosure case. Benjamin stepped forward, facing Judge Samuel Adams. He was no longer the weaker side. He had seen the fear in his opponent's eyes. "Your Honor," Benjamin said, his tone calm but carrying the weight of a declaration of war, "I formally request a full examination of all documents related to this foreclosure." Judge Adams raised an eyebrow. "And why should I grant this request?" Benjamin placed both copies of the mortgage agreement on the table. "Because my evidence is just the tip of the iceberg." His voice never wavered. "I have reason to believe that this bank didn't just forge my grandmother's signature. They have used fraudulent documents to seize multiple homes in the exact same way." A heavy silence blanketed the courtroom. Olivia shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this is just a delay tactic." "If it's a delay tactic or the truth, then you won't mind verifying it, will you?" Benjamin cut in. A dead pause followed. Judge Adams sighed, his sharp gaze shifting to Olivia. "Can the prosecution provide the original mortgage documents for verification?" Olivia didn't speak. Benjamin held her gaze unwavering. He had backed them into a corner, and he knew this was just the first crack in a much bigger truth waiting to be exposed. The counterattack that changed everything. Benjamin took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the documents before stepping into the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low but steady, "I have here 2 copies of the same mortgage agreement." He lifted both papers, angling them so the overhead lights illuminated every signature. The difference between them was impossible to ignore. "The first copy," Benjamin continued, "is the original, signed when my grandmother was still in good health." He paused, letting everyone take a good look. Then he raised the second document. "The second copy," he said slowly, "was signed on the day my grandmother was hospitalized after suffering a stroke." A heavy silence settled over the courtroom. Judge Samuel Adams squinted, his focus locked onto the 2 documents. "Are you certain about this?" His tone no longer carried indifference. Benjamin nodded, his gaze never leaving Olivia Williams. "The proof is right here." He walked toward the judge's bench, placing both documents before him. The silence was so thick that the soft rustle of paper was the only sound in the room. Judge Adams picked up a pen, carefully comparing the signatures. The shift in his expression said everything. Olivia sat rigidly in her seat, her knuckles turning white as she clenched her hands. Benjamin didn't need to say another word. The evidence spoke for itself. Now the only question left was, how would they face the truth? Judge Samuel Adams leaned back, tapping his fingers on the documents before him. At the start of this trial, He had assumed it would be a quick case. But now, things were no longer simple. He removed his glasses, studying the two mortgage agreements again. Two signatures, one before Benjamin's grandmother's hospitalization, one after, clearly written by someone else. A tense stillness hung in the air. Judge Adams exhaled, his voice slower, more deliberate. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his eyes still scanning the documents, "are you absolutely sure about this?" Benjamin didn't blink. "Your Honor, I've spent 6 months investigating this case. I didn't come here to gamble. I came here to reveal the truth." Judge Adams flicked his gaze toward Olivia Williams. She no longer looked composed. The flawless image she had maintained throughout the trial was cracking. Her once perfect hair was slightly out of place. Her fingers clenched so tightly around her pen that her knuckles turned white. She had never expected the case to take this turn. Judge Adams flipped through the files again, his eyes narrowing as he lingered on the forged mortgage document. Then he lifted his head, his tone now sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "Ms. Williams," he said, "can you explain why there are two completely different signatures on the same legal document?" Silence. No immediate response. Olivia swallowed hard, but it was obvious. She had no reasonable explanation. The jury whispered among themselves. They were no longer indifferent. They were paying attention. They were seeing exactly what Benjamin wanted them to see. Judge Adams set the documents down, tapping his pen against the desk as he mulled over the implications. For the first time in this trial, he no longer saw Benjamin Calloway as a desperate man clinging to false hope. He saw a man who just might prove something real. "I am granting the defense's request for a full review of the bank's foreclosure documents," Judge Adams declared, "and I expect a clear explanation from the financial institution involved." A shock wave rippled through the courtroom. Olivia's head snapped up, staring at the judge, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. But Benjamin knew. The scales of justice were starting to shift. A dead silence hung over the courtroom as Benjamin stood once more. His eyes swept across the room. The jury, Judge Samuel Adams, and finally Olivia Williams. "Your Honor," Benjamin began, his voice steady and firm, "we've discussed the forged signature, but that's not the only thing this bank has been trying to hide." He stepped forward and placed a thick stack of documents on the table. "I've been tracking the sale of my grandmother's mortgage, and I've discovered something crucial, something that turns this entire foreclosure into a fraud." Olivia froze. Judge Adams clasped his hands together, nodding slowly. "Go on, Mr. Calloway." Benjamin took a deep breath, leaning in slightly, his voice low but powerful. "My grandmother's loan was sold 3 times before ending up with the current bank. 3 separate transfers." A few jurors furrowed their brows. What did that mean? Benjamin didn't let the confusion linger. "By law," he continued, his gaze never leaving Olivia, "each time a mortgage is transferred, a legal document must be signed, certified by both the buyer and the seller." He paused, then lifted a specific document from the stack. "But here's the problem. The final transfer agreement has no valid signatures." A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Adams narrowed his eyes, flipping through the document. His frown deepened as he reached the blank space where signatures should have been, but weren't. "Ms. Williams," his voice dropped to a dangerous calm, "do you have an explanation for this?" Olivia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her fingers tightened around her pen, but this time she had no prepared response. Benjamin clenched his fist. He had found the one flaw they couldn't deny. "Your Honor," he pressed forward, "without a valid signature, this bank never legally owned my grandmother's loan. They had no legal right to foreclose on her home. And if they had no legal right—" He let the words hang, forcing everyone in the room to reach the conclusion themselves. Judge Adams sat up straighter, setting the documents down with a heavy thud. The jury understood. This wasn't just a mistake. The bank had committed fraud. Olivia had lost complete control. Benjamin had just turned the entire case on its head. Benjamin stood, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom before landing on Judge Samuel Adams. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and commanding, "I would like to call a witness to the stand." A murmur spread through the room. Olivia Williams blinked, momentarily thrown off. A witness? From where? The courtroom doors swung open. A woman walked in, older, tense, but carrying herself with a certain composure. She adjusted her glasses, fingers nervously entwining as she stepped onto the witness stand. "Please state your name for the record," Judge Adams said, his tone low but firm. She swallowed hard before speaking. "My name is Linda Myers. I am a notary public." The jury's attention sharpened. Olivia shifted in her seat, her hands clenching into tight fists. Benjamin took a step forward. "Ms. Myers, do you recall notarizing the second mortgage document for my grandmother, Alma Calloway?" Linda Myers blinked. Her throat went dry. She glanced toward Olivia, then down at her trembling hands. Silence. Benjamin waited. Judge Adams tapped his pen against the bench. "Ms. Myers, were you present when Mrs. Calloway signed this document?" No one breathed. Linda Myers took a deep, shaky breath. Then she finally spoke the truth. "No!" The courtroom erupted in hushed gasps and whispers. Olivia paled. Judge Adams immediately leaned forward. "Can you clarify what you mean by that?" Linda clasped her trembling hands together. "A bank representative gave me the already signed document. They told me the signature was valid, that I only needed to apply my notary seal." She paused, regret flooding her expression. "I didn't verify it, I just stamped it." The entire courtroom felt suffocated by the weight of her words. Olivia pressed her lips together, her eyes flickering with unease. Judge Adams flipped through the case file, his sharp gaze scanning the two signatures once more. Benjamin didn't have to say another word. Linda Myers' confession said it all. The bank hadn't just made a mistake. They had committed a crime. And for the first time, Olivia Williams was no longer in control of the trial. Every eye in the courtroom was locked on Judge Samuel Adams, who sat in deep thought, staring at the case file before him. Every piece of evidence had been laid bare. Every act of fraud had been exposed. Benjamin stood tall, silent, but with a fire of determination burning in his gaze. Across from him, Olivia Williams had lost her confident smirk. She sat frozen, her fingers clenched so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, her eyes never leaving the judge. Judge Adams slowly removed his glasses, setting them down with deliberate care. He glanced at Olivia, then turned to Benjamin. "After reviewing all evidence and witness testimony," he said, his voice steady, "this court finds that the foreclosure was carried out on fraudulent grounds." Benjamin held his breath. "The foreclosure is hereby null and void." The sound of the gavel striking the bench echoed through the room, and with that one motion, everything changed. The courtroom erupted. The jury murmured amongst themselves, some nodding in agreement. The spectators exchanged glances, their eyes wide with disbelief, as if they had just witnessed the impossible. Benjamin felt his legs weaken beneath him. He had done it. He had won. Judge Adams turned toward Olivia, his expression cold. "This court will conduct a full review of the bank's misconduct and the possibility of additional illegal foreclosures." Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew. The game was over. But Benjamin didn't care about Olivia anymore. He took a deep breath, stepping outside the courtroom, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on his face. At last, his grandmother's home was safe. He lifted his gaze to the sky, feeling a sense of peace fill his heart. Justice wasn't always easy, but today it had won. A new beginning. The courtroom had mostly cleared, but Benjamin remained standing, as if he still couldn't believe what had just happened. He had won. Not through tricks, not through luck, but through perseverance and determination. Judge Samuel Adams methodically gathered the case files from his desk. Then he rose from his chair, his sharp eyes scanning the emptying courtroom, before settling on Benjamin. "Mr. Calloway." Benjamin turned, no longer carrying the fear he had when he first entered the courtroom. For the first time, he felt seen. Judge Adams studied him for a moment, then offered a rare expression, a small, knowing smirk. "You surprised me today." Benjamin paused, caught off guard, not because it was sarcastic, but because it wasn't. "You're not a lawyer," Adams continued, "but today you argued better than many I've seen." Benjamin let out a soft chuckle. "I just did what I had to do, Your Honor." Adams folded his arms, nodding slowly. "And you did it well." Then he said something that Benjamin never expected. "Have you ever considered law school?" The question hit like a bolt of lightning. Benjamin had never thought about it. He looked at the judge. The same man who once doubted him, the same man who likely believed he had no chance, and now he was suggesting this. Benjamin let out a short laugh, shaking his head. I've never considered it. Adams raised an eyebrow. Maybe you should. Not everyone can stand in this courtroom and put a lawyer like Olivia Williams on the defensive. Benjamin fell silent. There was something in Adams' words, a recognition, an acknowledgement he never thought he'd receive. He glanced down at his hands that had once clenched in fear, had once trembled in frustration. Today those hands had held justice steady. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the last battle he would fight. Benjamin stepped out of the courthouse, taking a deep breath. The afternoon air filled his lungs, cool, fresh, and lighter than ever before. He had won. But this wasn't just his victory. It was proof of something greater. Justice doesn't belong to the rich and powerful. It belongs to those who refuse to back down. He stood at the top of the courthouse steps, watching people pass by. They didn't know his name. They didn't know the battle he had just fought. But he knew. Somewhere, someone else was facing the same kind of fight. Someone out there was standing alone against those who sought to crush them. And now Benjamin understood. People like him could win. Judge Samuel Adams had been right. Benjamin had the ability to fight for what was right. But more importantly, he had discovered something he had never fully realized before. His own perseverance. He wasn't a lawyer, but maybe one day he would become a true defender of justice. In the distance, Olivia Williams stepped out of the courthouse. Her face no longer carried its usual arrogance. She didn't greet Benjamin. She didn't say a word. Only her eyes spoke. An unspoken acknowledgement that she had underestimated him. Benjamin didn't need her validation. The truth had already spoken for itself. He turned and walked away. But this time he wasn't walking away as a man struggling against an unfair system. He walked away as someone who knew that with enough courage and determination, anyone could stand up for what is right. Because justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who refuse to give up. More than just a legal battle. Benjamin's story wasn't just about a courtroom fight. It was proof of something far more important. Justice isn't reserved for the strong. It belongs to those who never stop fighting. Benjamin had walked into that courtroom with nothing. No lawyer, no experience, no status. He had only the truth and the determination to defend what was right. They had underestimated him. They had mocked him. They had treated him like a man who had already lost. But he didn't back down. He kept pushing, searching for the truth, confronting power without fear. And in the end, his perseverance changed everything. Justice is not always easy. Those in power will fight to protect their wrongdoings. But this story is a reminder. The truth still has power. If you have the courage to pursue it, no matter who you are, you can make a difference. More importantly, Benjamin proved that victory isn't just about winning a case. It's about never letting an unjust system silence your voice. That's the greatest lesson of all. Never believe you are too small to fight back against what is wrong. Because justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who are willing to fight for it.